panel featuring Richard Bausch and Lisa Cupolo. Welcome, folks. Hi, guys. We're live from Arvida Book Co. Welcome, everyone. My name is Nizar Yanovich. I'll be moderating this panel as well as asking some questions about form and method in short story writing from Richard and Lisa. I am lucky enough to have taken Richard Bausch's writing workshop. It was a life-changing experience. I was the first writer's workshop I ever took, but I do have an MFA from Chapman University, and I can honestly say that it undid all the psychological and technical harms that grad school caused me. It was a very positive experience. I learned a tremendous amount, and I was truly humbled by my cohort. It was an amazing, amazing group of people. So thank you very much, Richard, for meeting you. Thank you, sir.
That's good to know.
That's good. And
that voice, listen to that. I sound like Carson on Downton Abbey.
Richard and Lisa, if you wouldn't mind giving brief introductions for our YouTube audience to yourselves and your work. Yes, you may. Of course.
I'm going to introduce, this is Richard Bausch. He has written 26 books.
No.
28?
I published.
You might have to do your own
The
introduction.
new novel is my 23rd book, and there are 2 contracted, so that would be 25.
Okay, close. Better to be more than less.
Yes.
The master of the short story has written many novels that are incredibly good. 2 have been turned into movies. One is Recon, and the other is a French film called Espèce menacée, which means something is out there. And
It's endangered species.
oh, it's endangered species. I forgot. And I speak French.
She's fluent.
Anyway, thrilled to be on a panel with this man. This is my first collection of stories. That's all I have to say about mine. Unless you have more.
Tell the history. Well, I'll tell your history.
No. We don't have time for that.
Lisa Cupolo has lived around the world, really. She's lived in England. She, for a year, worked for an organization teaching and helping AIDS orphans in Kenya. She has a degree in philosophy. She has a degree in photography from the London Institute, and she's got an MFA from the University of Memphis. And this book reflects the wide experience she's creating from a marvelous diversity of experience, because what she does is take places she's been and wander through various consciousnesses that she's making up, and they're brilliant. They really are brilliant.
Thank you, honey.
And I love her to pieces.
Both of these writers, what unifies them, in my opinion, from reading both of their short story works, is an amazing ability to shift point of view, have a diverse point of view with characters that don't reflect their background, sometimes don't even reflect things that are possible within a physical realm or a real realm. And it's an amazing ability that I hope not only myself could one day accomplish that level of diverse perspective that sounds authoritative, which is, to use a term that Richard always incorporates, which is where the word author comes from. Richard told me that. It's an amazing feat to do as a writer. So I would like to open the discussion and hopefully have a discussion which is beneficial to anyone who wishes to enter into the world of short story, understand the methodologies behind it. And I'd like to go back to the foundations of short story and allegory. And the heritage of short story, if we trace it back to allegories, is imbuing meaning in a subtle way, in a non-literal way, through mythology. And the question I wanted to ask you guys, when you're writing short stories, and this is open to both of you, obviously both of your writing is deeply meaningful, but open to interpretation. How precognitive is the injection of meaning into your work, and can it be bad for the writing process to think too much about it before you embark on writing the stories?
If I know too much, I don't trust it. There's plenty of room for philosophy and opinions and stuff in essays, and we have some great essayists that you ought to read. I mean, you ought to read all of them, everybody. But for me, a story, the practice of fiction has more, it's much closer to the cave than it will ever be to the drawing room or to the schoolroom. It is a form, to me, of primitive play, of making up stories, making it up. It's so much fun. And so that's, to me, it all goes all the way back to those caves at Lascaux. There was no criticism or scholarly work on painting back then, but those are world class art on that wall. It's just itself, and it's more, as I say, it's expression. I think of it all
Mhm.
as expression.
I think that's what we both share in that is we don't come from it from a point of view of an intellectual idea or something to put on the page. I just, for me, it's always images. I mean, I've been walking around with this image for 2 days where I was in my
Careful,
apartment.
you're with me. I can dib it.
No, you can
We'll
take
go
it.
dibs.
No, but mine often start from memories and yours don't. That's where we kind of differ because mine are from different places. And I have this, when you remember something of your past, but you don't know why it's meaningful. And for me, it's this time when I was in Toronto and in this apartment, a really cool apartment I had above, you know, a house. You had to, when you got it, you had to go through the back patio like this to get into the house. And when you opened the door, there was the toilet. It was the bathroom you walked into. And I mean, it was the crazy, but it was the coolest place, and it had like great windows and very odd. And I remember just being there, and I was going to the opera, my first opera with a friend, and I remember getting ready, and I was playing music, and it was a summer day in Toronto, humid and things, and I remember what I was wearing, and I had this excitement of youth, and I was like 24, and I just have to write about it somehow. And I don't know what it means, but there's something there. And so that's just an example of how images come to me. And yes, I was lucky to live in different places. So I have a lot of images that just start with, oh, I remember what this is. And I think for everyone who's a writer, just how you think about your life, like memories is, what are those memories? I mean, how do we make sense of them? And who are we really now today versus when I was 24 sitting in my apartment in Toronto? That's fascinating. So,
Well, it's great ground for making up stuff.
mhm.
The brain is this astounding instrument. It actually stores in memory every single waking and sleeping moment of your life. They they touched parts of the brain of this woman in surgery, and she quoted whole chapters of books she'd read 40 years earlier. They have now seen that nothing is lost, and much of what we think of as subconscious is actually the jumble of pre-conscious memory that the brain just stirs when you're asleep because all of your defenses are down and you're not, you don't have any sort of how did Freud put it? You don't have the superego telling you what you should be thinking. And so all of this stuff comes through, and a lot of it has to do, but that means every experience. So any dream you had, anything you saw, a movie you might have seen, um, and it's all in one contemporaneous place, ago, the past. The psyche doesn't know a thing about chronology. That's why we say, oh, that feels like it was earlier today and it was 20 years ago. Well, it is in the same place as me telling you this to begin that sentence. It's there, as present as that. So, what I learned to do, I think, as a writer is to trust that if it occurs to me sort of just in the process, that it's probably going to be okay. So, a lot of the time, it feels like I'm being given dictation. I mean, it's shut up. It's no accident that that for centuries people believed in a muse that spoke through the writer, because that's the experience. It feels as if something's channeling through. It's like a marvelous experience of something coming from some other where. And you're being given that gift of knowing what to say. You've experienced that, of course.
Is the muse of who sees it on the page, the point of view, is that, and also an organic, it's like it's a sense, or is that a decision that you make before you start writing? Like what eyes are seeing this? I'm referring maybe here to Long Division. Now knowing a little bit more about your background, that you were actually working in Kenya, but the eye of the story of Long Division is through the eyes of a father who goes to see his son in Kenya. And the way I interpreted it was finally seeing his son as someone autonomous, an adult, and seeing himself transform to that separation of his son. So rather than writing it through your perspective, you decided to write it through the perspective of, I think you referred to it as a middle-aged man earlier, Richard.
He's an older man. He's retired, and his son's in
In
Kenya.
my case, he's middle-aged.
Right. Yeah. You're middle aged.
No, I'm old.
But he's going to fetch his son in Kenya. He's going all the way from Portland all the way to Nairobi, where his son is working, with women and doing work during the AIDS pandemic. And the question was about point of view. So I started that story in first person maybe, and then switched to third. So usually I just have ideas that come down, and then I am deliberate after about going to see what works better, first or third. I'm not very good at the second, but I'd love to do that. But first or third. So a lot of times I'll put it in one or the other, and then you learn more about the character as you're going. So usually I make it a deliberate decision in what sounds better for me.
I do the same. I have often changed the point of view just to shake things up.
Yeah.
I remember when I sold my first novel, I had two chapters. One was called He Speaks and the other was called She Speaks, and they were both in the first person. And the guy who had bought the book said, I want you to go home and maybe change those two sections into third person. And I remember riding home saying, what the hell, you bought the damn thing. I don't know. What the hell? I should say, no, I'm not doing it. So I was pretty incensed about it. And I went home and started in the third, because I felt inspired when I was writing those I was talking to those characters. They were excited, like they were writing me a letter about themselves. But when I started writing it in third person, I could not believe how liberating the experience was, because now I could speak about them, and I didn't have to exercise all that subtle stuff to give the reader the matters that they wouldn't say in first person. And
exactly. Yeah.
So that happens often. I mean, and something comes, usually a lot of times to you too, it comes as a line. You hear a line or
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you start with the line and then see what happens.
But changing the point of view is something more comes after when you're editing.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's a thing that, real quick, that Hemingway said one true sentence.
And then the next sentence.
And my point is any sentence, because that sentence predicates the next sentence. And the one after that predicates the one after that. So if you begin a story with, I was telling Annie here, if you begin a story, I was being chased by a gigantic pair of sweat socks. The next sentence has to have to do with that. And the sentence after that has to have to do with, so you just spin it out. I've done that a couple of times. You start with that opening line and then just see where it takes you,
I believe it was a letter to the lady of the house. Is that the title of the story?
Yeah.
You decided, it seems like the majority of that story is a memory, perhaps one derived from real life, but it's formatted as a letter and it's punctuated as an address to the lady of the house in the beginning and then at the end. So rather than tell it just as a straight through narrative memory, how was the decision made? Maybe if you don't remember in that exact instance, but how was it?
Remember.
You do? Okay, I'd love to hear
I
it.
wrote it as a song in 1968. I was 23 years old. The last verse of the song goes, if it has come to this kind of thing, the silence shocked by the telephone's ring, then something's died within, but I know I loved you then, and Marie, I'd do it again. And I thought, I wonder if I could make a story out of that. And one night I stayed up all night making this letter from that song, because that day I had been talking to an elderly lady who talked about how her cousin was someone, she was talking about him young and in love, and how she was young and in love, and how her marriage failed, and he was still married, and she was sort of blue about it. She must have been 85. And I thought, I'm going to find a way to maybe put those two together. And I wrote it, and then thought, nah, it's too much philosophy in it. I mean, he's making all these comments, and so I left it off the end of the first collection of stories. And then too long a story to tell, but the New Yorker bought it years later. My agent sent it to them on a whim, and I still get an occasional letter about it, mostly from people who are in stale marriages.
But
saying, "Oh,
NPR does it every
Yeah.
Valentine's Day.
yeah,
Reads it on their show. I can't remember what show it is, but they do
This
that every
American
year.
Life."
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I get $20 of the royalties every year from This American Life.
Right.
The is there ever a intuition to, I guess the term nowadays would be autofiction, to hyper fictionalize? And if I were to ask you specifically, Richard, the story, I think it's The Man Who Knew Stacy Bell.
Bellstar.
Bellstar, The Man Who Knew Bellstar, that's it.
Uh,
The degree to which that was derived from something real and transliterated, I mean, I'm assuming that's pure fiction.
Yep. I'll tell you, well, very quickly, there's a movie called Five Easy Pieces, and in that movie, Jack Nicholson's character picks up this hitchhiker, and she's very, very negative, going, "Oh, it's filth. Everything is filth. I don't mind dirt, but filth. Filth is terrible. I'm going to Alaska because it appears to be very white. I'm going to Alaska," and Nicholson, the character, is, in the front seat. And I got to thinking, what if somebody picked up a hitchhiker and there was something really serious? So I started the story, and when he says, "Where are you going?" she goes, "Down." I thought she was telling him she was dying. And a little bit later, she pulls out a gun and shoots the guy on the other side of the counter. And I went, what the hell is this? I've been watching too much television. And I put it aside. And then, about a week later, I was talking to a student in the bar after class, and he was saying, "I don't want the character to do that." And I said, "You got to go with it, man, and shake the black ball and see what comes up. You got to go with it." And inside my head, this voice is going, "Why don't you go home and follow your own advice, dumbass?" I went home and wrote it out, but that's how that happened. I'm sorry, honey, I'm going on too long here.
No, you're not. It's okay. It's a great story.
It was inspired then by the film Five Easy Pieces.
No, not really.
Not really. Okay,
That's
okay.
the seed of it. Is
The seed of
picking
it.
up the
Yeah.
hitchhiker. Yeah.
And then the story, Fort Pierce, Florida, inspired by the life of Zora Neale Hurston.
Correct. Yeah.
And how did you decide to tackle that? That is one of the craziest ideas for a short story ever, to embody an existing,
And it's
deceased
so
now, a
good.
real
It's
writer.
such a brilliant
It's a brilliant
story.
story. Yeah.
Yeah, many of you have heard this one, but it's about when I was doing my graduate degree in Memphis, Tennessee. I was really immersed in. We were together, and I was pregnant, and it all happened very quickly. And
I
this
remember
is
her
a
trying
long
to get
time
me
ago.
to come out of the bar by going like this with her dress and showing her pregnant belly.
Yeah, so that we did a lot of me picking you up, and we had one car. We were sharing a car. So, well, you wanted me to come into the bar. Anyway,
Yeah, I'm
I
going,
was a
"Come on, come on,"
graduate
and she's
student.
going like
You can
this.
imagine the whole story. But I had come from Toronto, and I didn't know a lot about the South and the history and the Civil War and all sorts of things. And I didn't know. I mean, I was really, really stunned by what Memphis was like, what it was like for real. And in terms of like being in a classroom, and I was teaching at the time as part of my degree. And the black kids on one side, the white kids on the other. The black kids had their kids with them, like babies, in the class. It was just there, and they didn't like each other. And from the very beginning, I was like, okay, let's figure this out. How are we going to sit together? How are we going to communicate? So of course, that's when I began to really study. And I should have done a degree or minor in African American lit, but I didn't. And so I really studied Zora. And at the time, naively, I'm really stupidly, I just went, I'm going to not do this essay that I had to do. I asked the professor, I said, I can't write essays. just your question about premeditated, nothing is premeditated. I do not write essays well. So I said, I'm pregnant. I can write. I'm here for a creative writing degree. Can I please write this, creatively, imagining? And that's how I came up with that story.
Oh, wow.
So that was the very seed of it. I did okay on but I changed it quite a bit and kept working with this character that was in the room. And so yeah, a friend of mine was like, that would be a great short movie, like a short film, because it's all in one room. It's Zora Neale Hurston, who's she was in Fort Pierce, Florida. And
Tell what she had to do. Yeah,
she was amazing. She was very well known, but she at later years in her life, she was in her 60s then, had to work as a maid. She'd had all this controversy in her life, but she was brilliant. And then she goes in to clean this room, and there's this white guy in this, he's tapping on his typewriter, thinking he's a genius, thinking he's Hemingway. He's
with the
young.
bourbon in the glass.
Yeah, he's drinking, and
he's a genius.
so I just imagine how would that conversation be, and really but dialogue is the hardest thing to write. So I really, really worked on that story for years. Yeah.
I mean, there's such a tragic tone to it. The way she rationalizes why she's doing that work is it's research for her writing.
Yes.
And I don't. And it's probably based on reality. She studied anthropology.
Oh yeah, she was always researching in the West. She would just come back from the West Indies. She was doing her work, and that's what occupied her. That's what she was doing. So I don't know if that was for real or not, but that's just how it came out.
One of the fun things about that story is the guy reads her a couple samples of his writing, and it gives you the delight that Midsummer Night Dream gives you when Shakespeare has them do the bad play, and you get to see the greatest writer who ever lived writing badly on purpose. Well, Lisa's coming really close to that because the guy's writing is awful, and she it's funny.
I think that's a compliment.
Yes, I mean, it's,
Yeah,
intentionally.
The line he wrote was something like, the cigarette flew into his mouth like a bat.
Yeah,
Something like
right.
that. Which is
good.
perfectly bad in a way.
Yeah.
It's good bad in the sense that it's doing the purpose. It's showing how bad the guy is.
Mhm.
Marvelous.
So, Richard, at the beginning of Stories of Richard Bausch, and I can't believe I didn't know this. So, when you take Richard's workshop, and I'm assuming his classes, Richard loves to tell jokes. He has phenomenal comic timing. He's a great joke teller. I'm sure a lot of people here know that. At the beginning of this book, in the About the Author section, it said, and I do not know how you never told us this, that you were once a stand-up comedian.
Yeah, I did that.
Which is remarkable. And I think what's incredible about stand-up as a medium, and I know that Chuck Palahniuk talked about this at one of his workshops, that they had to bring their writing to public places like bars and read their short stories. And based off of the audience's reactions, the public's reaction, you could edit. So in the capacity of stand-up, I'm sure you had a lot of opportunity to road test stories.
Not really.
Not really, okay.
What I was doing was improvising. I mean, we were a singing group, and then there would be a break in between, of about 20 minutes, and I would just stand up and do shtick. And because I could do that. I knew that from high school. I did funny voices on the microphone at the cafeteria, and everybody laughed. Once, there's two brief experiences to sum it all up. We were playing the Hoopston Corn Festival with 25 runners-up for the Miss America contest. There were 2,600 people in the audience. We sang a song that I had written called Laura Ann to a little girl, and then I did some shtick, and I'm walking up down with this mic with 2,600 people, and they were laughing so hard that I made a thing out of that. I remember I felt so brilliant. I said, I bet I could make you laugh by moving my right shoulder. And they were laughing. And I said, it's going to happen any second now. Wait. And they're laughing. I said, here it comes. And they're dying. And I went like that. And I'm going, this is what I'm going to do this. This is what I'm going to do. A week later, I'm playing at the University of Illinois. Not to give you the wrong idea, it was a fraternity house for all the beer I could drink, and I was going to do some shtick, and there were maybe 30 people in there, and it was like I was talking to an oil painting. And I said, no, I can't. I'm not doing this. I'm not ever going to go through this again.
Yeah.
When you have 2,600 people, it ain't hard to make them laugh. 30 people, that's tough. So that was the end of it. So then just knowing jokes has to do with, there's a cadre of friends, I'm losing them fast too, by the way, who we tell jokes. One of the things you'll hear, another guy who's nervous about the size of his dinghy. Anyway, anyway, the sorry. Where was I?
I don't know. Let's go on.
Lisa just said, I don't know. Let's go on.
Another question. I really do forget.
I did too. Oh,
Well, yeah.
the one you'll hear. I have one. I've said that to Rick. He's my neighbor across the street. I'll say, I got one for you.
Oh, your friends, you call them up. And,
Yeah, I got one for you. You know?
Yeah. But that's
And they
not-
travel around the country, Once, right after Woody Allen had that affair, my friend Susan DeSessa, who's no longer in the business, she was then working at Random House, called me and said, "Did you hear about Woody Allen's newest movie?" I said, "No." She said, "Honey, I fucked the kids." And I said, "Where did you get that?" Because it could have been it was only hours old. And she told me, "Give me the number." And I'm going to trace it. I got all the way to Oregon, Portland. And the guy said, I don't remember. I'm sorry. I heard it at
about
a
who
party.
told the joke.
Yeah,
You're trying to find the
I wanted
origin
to
of the
find the
joke. Yeah.
source, Took me 3 hours to get to
I
Oregon.
still think you should write a book about all the jokes. That's definitely something you should write.
Yeah, even the
Jokes
journey.
and writing advice. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And by the way, the only joke I found in either of your work was in Lisa's.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
work. Yeah, and I was surprised, and I will read it now.
Oh, okay.
It's a dirty joke. Age deepens a person's wisdom. It's like that joke, the call girl who comes to the door for a man's 80th birthday. "I'm here to give you super sex," she tells the old man. "The way I feel," the old man says, "I'll just take the soup."
That's from Aunt Florence, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's from Richard's Aunt Florence.
My Aunt Florence was
she came to our
marvelous.
house,
Yeah.
and Lila, our daughter's middle name is after her, and she's just like him. She came to our house in Memphis. She was 92, and they'd sit there and do jokes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I kept probably 3 or 4 of hers that I can tell.
Oh, she
But
was
that's-
a
it's
hell
stolen
of a
for
joke.
sure.
There's
Yeah.
one she would tell real quick about a lady having her bathroom painted, and the painter leaves. Her husband comes up. He's really tired. He puts his hand on the wall, standing there urinating, and he goes to bed. And then she sees it. So in the morning, she calls the painter and says, "Can you come over here? I got a problem." He says, "Okay." And he comes over and says, "What's the matter?" He says, "I want to take you upstairs and show you where my husband put his hand last night." And he goes, "Oh, lady, I'm really tired. I'll split a beer with you."
I'll split a beer with you, though. Yeah.
Anyway.
I mean, the genesis of the question really came to me and the idea of what provokes the courage to embark on writing a story. I mean, for me, like, you tell a great story and people react to it, people laugh here. I mean, that could be a good indication that it might be a good story. It might lend itself to good material. Have either of you told stories that turned into written short stories because of a public's reaction or a friend's reaction?
My novel piece is based on a story I told for years.
That you told for years,
Mhm.
and you would consistently get.
Oh yeah, my
feedback.
friend George Garrett. It's dedicated. Part of it. It says, in tribute to George Garrett, who for 20 years kept trying to get me to write this story.
Right. And it's a story about your father,
Yeah.
what happened to him in the war.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, huh?
Oh, for me, I was thinking about it today, and I always think that stories, like you said, just come to you. But there's this great book that Elena Ferrante. Did you guys read the Italian trilogy of Napolitan? Napolitan? How do you say that? Anyway, she has this book called In the Margins, and I was reading it the other day, and it's about how the stories that you have in your head are all the stories you've ever read. And so I feel like the stories I have in my head, I come from a totally different place than he comes from, living life. We read things differently. We have very similar hearts, but she made the point that everything you are is part of the story. So you're keeping little bits of it, right, in your subconscious. Of course, you have your own little I in there that's rewriting your own story, but we're just in the way that we're all connected. We're all connected in our stories, and the little I voice of your own is steering it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I love that because I think that's really true. And so you just, it's all in there. And then that little I part, which isn't the whole thing, is your unique little stamp, but it's not even really, right? Would you
I
agree?
think
You're the same.
totally, absolutely. I think that writing is the thing. Expression in language is our most prized, measurelessly priceless possession. It's the thing that makes us what we are
Mm.
as a species, truly. The fact that, well, I used to it's a thing that the linguists call a triadic event. And you won't see it anywhere else in the universe as far as we know, is two minds connected by a third thing. Now, we do that every day without thinking of it. We tell jokes, we gossip, all of that stuff. It tells stories about friends. But think of what it really is and how it works in literature. Here is the Iliad, and that man caught between the two camps, and he runs, and the guy with Odysseus throws a spear, and it lands over his head, and he stops frozen and knows he's going to die. And a little later, there is Hector with his little baby son who's scared of him because he's got the horsehair on the helmet and stuff. And Hector takes the helmet off so his son can recognize him. And it moves us. And it was written 2,700 years ago, 800 years before Christ walked the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And it still moves in us. It's the greatest evidence in the world that there is a common human heart, something that connects us all. Doesn't matter the language or
Well,
the time.
and that's where short stories come in
Mhm.
because they make sense of life, because life doesn't make sense. And so that's why it's so comforting to read,
Yeah.
because you find some sense, some order. There has to be some kind of ending, something to, because you also need the action. You can't have 40 years of the same, which happens a lot in life. But when you're reading, you're in it, you're moving with the story, you're alive in it,
Mhm.
and moved, hopefully.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
about experience.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful line from Mark Van Doren, who was a fine poet. And there's a good book of his about reading literature, a marvelous book. And he's talking about the Iliad. And he says, even knowing the outcome, we're moved, he says. And then he says, because mortality still stings.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he's really talking about, is that what we're really dealing with when we're writing fiction that is aiming to be serious is the truth that stays true. That's always true, no matter where or when the experience takes place. Our the truth of it is always completely the human story, and it stays that way. The
And
same
also
longing.
seeing yourself in that character
Mhm.
who is experiencing that and feeling that that's you. And while you're reading it, could be reality or not, but you're experiencing it too. That's what's so moving.
Well, that's what empathy really is. I mean,
yeah,
empathy
right.
is the most empathetic
So good. Yeah.
moments that you have when it's going really well, and it's as if somebody's murmuring in your ear. You have all of the intelligence and the compassion of an angel. And then you quit work for the day and you're just as confused and messed up as everybody else.
Yep.
It really is this place you go to where you have this sense of control, of power, really, although you're being guided into it. It's, again, why you believe in angels and goddesses.
Yeah, I mean, on that note, it's interesting to me how different writers access truth and what rings true. I guess someone like Chuck Palahniuk or David Foster Wallace, they're trying to access truth, I think, through details and hyperrealism. And in a way, it almost seems more fantastical by being hyperreal. And then you look at mythology, which might have mythological creatures, but there seems to be an undertone of truth that seems more real than the hyper real thing.
Mhm.
And accessing that, I think, is kind of a mystery for any writer, but also for a reader. It's just something you recognize on a cellular level when something rings true. Is there a way to test that? Is there a way to test it maybe in a reading room?
No, it's
So
not that I know of.
No way to test it.
No.
I think you have readers, yeah,
Readers
for
that help?
sure. I mean, Richard never does.
Oh wow.
Not even me. Sometimes his daughter Emily sometimes, um, but mostly he's unusual cat over here. Also, if he finds a writer he loves, like students, he gives them one story by Chekhov, and he expects they're going to go and read all the stories. I'm like, well, you have to assign it. They're not going to go read them,
So
and
I did it.
he's like,
That's what
well,
I did.
why would you not find an author and then
Yeah.
just read everything? So you're unusual. But I have to share my stories for sure. Just do you, because a lot of times something on the page you don't know, it's half in your head still. It might not be on the page.
Yeah.
You get tangled in the two. I do.
I
Yeah.
noticed in workshop it was almost the opposite of what I expected the
Uh-huh.
reaction to be.
Right.
For my own work, I don't know for others how they came
Right.
in expecting
Yeah.
it, but it's always the
Yeah.
thing I thought would fail seemed to ring the truest for the readers, and the thing that I was kind of sure about, people were left kind of confused.
I
Yeah.
remember the first reading
Yeah.
I gave, read a line in it, and everybody laughed, and I didn't know the line was funny.
Right. That happens.
And I
Yeah.
realized the line was funny. I'm like, oh yeah, that's good.
Uh,
That's funny.
But you're an anomaly of that kind of thing. Most people need a writer's group and
Yeah.
people to share with, and yeah.
Right. Okay,
Mhm.
interesting insight. I want to open it up to Q&A if we want to go in that
Yes.
direction, guys. Anyone have any questions? We have about 10 minutes left. Anyone have any questions about writing for Richard, Lisa?
Ah.
We've been talking about truth. Truth, I think, is probably the most elusive concept. There may be like two different types of truth. There may be a subjective truth and an objective truth. I'm sure we're all talking about a subjective truth. What do you think?
Truth for me in fiction. To be honest, I don't know really. I know some things that I believe are true, that I often talk about, not really about fiction, but about life and where we are and all that stuff. Um, but I don't want to go there. That's politics and stuff. My point about truth in fiction is the truth of the experience. If you can convince the reader that what is happening if it feels true. There's a moment in War and Peace when Natasha's at her first ball, and Tolstoy says she was at that pitch of happiness where it is impossible to imagine an ungenerous thought in another person. It's like, oh man, I know
That's definitely
that
a
feeling.
truth. Yes, because you can relate to it because you're connecting to the feeling.
It's not truth as
Uh-huh.
Her father wrote something like 15 books of poetry. He was really an amazing guy.
Yeah.
And he had like this one poem that I thought was really interesting. And what that poem was, it was a description of the day, in great
Uh-huh.
detail, in iambic pentameter or whatever. And then and he ends the poem by saying, "Once I'm gone, that day will be gone."
Uh-huh.
So that moved me, right? And the thing is that we see things through our eyes, and we believe them or we think they're fundamental or whatever, and then we're gone, and that vision of the world is
no. It's if you wrote it down, it ain't gone.
No. He wrote his impression. He didn't really
Right.
but what he wrote was, I have like a very vivid impression of this day, and when I'm gone, so will it be.
That's life, baby.
Do you
Yeah,
know?
that is.
Do you
That's
know
the sad
James
reality.
Wright's poem "Lying in a Hammock" at William Duffy's farm in Pine Island, Minnesota? Here it is. It's very short. Over my head, I see the bronze butterfly asleep on the black trunk, the wind blowing him like a leaf in green shadow. Down the ravine behind the empty house, the cowbells follow one another into the distances of the afternoon. To my right, between two pines, the droppings of last year's horses blaze up into glowing stones. I lean back as the evening darkens and comes on. A hawk flies over, looking for home. I have wasted my life.
Yep.
It's a great poem. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Kenny.
Thank you. Oh, that's so sweet.
If I may repeat it just for the YouTube audience, and I apologize.
Yes.
I forgot to repeat yours because
Yeah.
the mics are connected. The question is, how do the authors inspire each other? How does Lisa inspire Richard, and how does Richard
Yeah.
inspire Lisa?
You all know we're married, right? Everybody's got that by now. We hang out together. Oh,
We're friends too.
yeah, we're always inspiring. But I would say, like yesterday, I am writing a novel right now, and I was thinking of there's this couple, and I was like, oh, what about the guy's parents? What are they? And we went swimming. We go to swimming together, which has been really great since it's been warm. And we talked about the parents all the way back and forth, just chatting. I mean, that's a very we have other parts that are not as idyllic and sweet as that, but as writers, that was a pretty great thing. And I was really nervous about it. I was thinking, God, I don't know this guy well enough, because you're supposed to know what he has for breakfast. You're supposed to know what tennis shoes he wears. You're supposed to have all of it. I was like, I'm not invested enough in this character. But then he was just like, well, the dad just whatever. He can just be, he had money and then he died or whatever, And I was like, oh, okay, because it's the character. So that kind of support is priceless. It's the best. But just generally supportive about the writing life, which is very, very difficult. This is my first book. I've been writing for a long time. I teach at Chapman. I do other things. I ghostwrite. So just the belief to keep going is probably the biggest support you need as a writer. And to have a home one in-house is really cool.
Well, Lisa will come and sit down and say, I'm really worried about this paragraph. What do you think? And she'll read it, and I'll go, good God, that's amazing.
Oh,
Because it is. A lot of times for Lisa, I get to be the fortunate cheerleader because she has a larger quotient of doubt sometimes than I do, being earlier in her career. And I've got several books to prove that I can do it, even though every single time I'm sure it's going to fail.
You're just as doubtful, baby.
Yeah, oh, I know. I go and say, they think it's bad.
Yeah, if you're waiting for an
Yeah,
editor.
they're just trying to think of a nice way to tell me to go away. Yeah, it's never going to go away if you have the doubt. But also, Lisa inspires me with every single motion and sound, and everything she does to me is inspiring. She's an amazing human being.
Thank you. So are you. Thank you.
It's a very
Good
sweet
question.
note to end on, but I would also like to, if we have one more
Yes.
question, we have time
good.
for a quick question if anyone has another one. All right, guys, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nazir. That was great. Thank you. You did a great job, honey. It was hard to do, 2 people.